What does it mean to be called crazy in a crazy world? Listen to Madness Radio, voices and visions from outside mental health. Welcome to Madness Radio. This is your host, Will Hall. And today my guest is Dick Russell. Dick is the author of 17 books on subjects ranging from the JFK assassinations to the biography of James Hillman, the biography of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and the migration of gray whales. Today we are talking about his book, My Mysterious Son, a life-changing passage between schizophrenia and shamanism about his son, Franklin. So welcome on the show, Dick Russell.
Thanks so much, Will. Good to be with you today.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your persistence in joining the show. Gosh, there's so much we could talk about. We could just do a show on James Hillman, but I think people maybe have not heard about your book, My Mysterious Son. I highly recommend it. It's extremely important book because of the depth of your appreciation for the uniqueness of your son. I don't usually have shows that focus on family members because I like to hear from the person themselves, but I thought your book was so striking and your way of relating to your son was so important that people learn about that I really wanted to have you on the show. So I'm really grateful to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate that. And I hope that the listeners will get at least my perspective, which is quite different, I think, than the medical model, but maybe similar to what a lot of people have gone through who have had, I guess we could call, otherworldly experiences that are unappreciated. And we can go from there.
Yeah, exactly. And also what do you do as a family member? I mean, I would hope that the system, the psychiatric system and family members in general really take some guidance from you on how to engage with a son who seems like they're in a different reality because well maybe they are in a different reality and maybe that's a valuable positive thing in some ways. So let's get started. So how did you first kind of discover or learn or kind of start to appreciate that your son Franklin was like different or not quite fitting in the expected normal sort of range of what one might expect a son to be?
Yeah, well, he's biracial. His mother is African American and I'm Caucasian. So he was raised, in an extended family of ours that we were both living in at the time, and very bright from the time he was born. Interestingly, when he was born, I remember a close friend saying to me, I think Franklin is really your teacher. And in a lot of ways, that has proven true because, it's he who's taught me over the course of time, sometimes well, I just didn't get what was going on, really. But, he's really taught me that what's called schizophrenia or bipolar disorder in some cases is actually someone who is in tune with other worlds that a lot of so-called normal people like myself don't see or don't understand. And from the time he was young, he exhibited. I remember I wrote about it in the book that shortly before he turned 16, he was very nervous one day, but he handed me this typewritten sheet of paper, and he was describing a vision that he'd had the night before, just before he fell asleep. And so he'd been lying in bed with his eyes closed, and he'd passed through a square, and then a spiral with protruding rays, and then another much larger circle that turned into a sun. And as he moved closer to this, and I'm going to quote him here, it became a tunnel. This tunnel was as if in space, and nothing else existed. I moved slowly along and through it. All around it was glowing a green yellowish color. Then there was an opening that I've never seen before, and that's so beautiful I couldn't even imagine. There was a column with a pyramid in front and more columns on both sides, which Franklin moved through. And he wrote, at this point, I was about 10 feet above the ground, where there was an open eye, like the one on the dollar bill. He continued to ascend higher and higher. To my right, he wrote, there was water glistening with the light of the sun. Further ahead, came another tunnel like a cave, with dips in the earth, although it wasn't musty. It was shiny and full of colors. The last thing I remember is going through that tunnel slowly. So I've looked back on that piece that he wrote when he was almost 16 a number of times in the years since. I didn't really quite get it, what was going on at the time. And it wasn't too long after that when he came home from school one day and he said, I can't find my old self again. And he didn't know what was happening. And he was shortly thereafter, after a great summer, he'd stayed with our family in Mexico. He'd been gone fishing, he learned to surf, and he had a full scholarship his junior year at a private school in Boston. But I remember one day one of the teachers observed that he sometimes seems to be out of touch and unable to focus his mind. So suddenly I find written on the wall in this black magic marker in his room says, I'm going to die and the world will be a better place. So out of the blue, I mean, out of nowhere, he's thinking about suicide.
Wow. Wow.
One night he had a complete breakdown and he had to be hospitalized. They did this preliminary MRI and it came back essentially normal of neurological conditions in terms of that. They immediately wanted to put him on several medications.
When he wrote that on the wall, because we're talking about shamanism, right? So I'm fast forwarding to like death, rebirth, that whole process. Was he sad or upset or angry, or was the breakdown like what was it, or was it like a detachment from reality kind of breakdown, or what was going on?
Yeah, the breakdown itself was a detachment. I don't know what he was thinking when he wrote that on the wall because I saw it later. I was very alarmed. But once he was in the hospital, he was seemed very removed from certainly from me and from his mom, and he was very paranoid. And at that time, hearing voices, and so we didn't know what to do, obviously, except follow the doctor's instructions. And
Sure, yeah.
and so he's suddenly on three different medications, and this was the beginning of a number of really, really tough years. I mean, in and out of hospitals, hating to be on medication because it made him feel so deadened, and yet not knowing what else to do. Lived in group homes at different times. I mean, it was. I write about this very, very difficult
Yeah.
10, 15 year period, and I'm sure it's something we have in common with a lot of people.
Yeah, you were following the standard advice on what to do, and it sounds like he was also experiencing some trauma from the system itself, it sounds like.
He was, and he kept a journal back in those days that was really. I wish one of them he lost somehow, but there was another one where he wrote in his journal one day, meditation as opposed to medication. Is it the answer, or is a combination of meditation and counseling? Where does bipolar illness come from, and why do so many people have it? Is it from abuse? Is it from intense desire? Is it a chemical difference from the norm? I mean, he's speculating,
Hmm.
in his so-called madness about these things and writing them down because he's obviously wrestling with this too and trying to figure out what the hell's happening to him.
Yeah, so there's this incredible intelligence and creativity. He's not just submerged in the system thinking in those terms. He's also questioning
Yeah.
that. And whatever, I mean, 15, 16, so many stresses and changes, and identity is a huge thing that's up. And also sounds like you and his mother divorced early. Is that part of what the story is? And
We still lived as part of the same extended family at that time, which is sort of a communal living situation that we'd had for some years. So we weren't really we just weren't together anymore, and we were had both sort of moved on in our lives in that sense. And there was a long period of time where she and I, her name was Etta, she's an amazing person, musician, cellist, singer. We didn't get along, and we often differed on what to do, about Franklin. And I was admittedly when he was younger and growing up, I didn't spend a lot of time with him. I think I spent much more time with him, of course, when the situation, forced it.
yeah.
But I was happy to let other people raise him. I was writing, I was, doing what I did. And so that was the reality of our situation. And I discovered later when I would look at his journals and then he would let me, and that, wow, I mean, in a lot of ways, he was a better writer than me. He could really express himself. I'll read one more while we're back in this early period.
Yeah, yeah.
He said, if you're trying to cross a river, you take a boat. If you have no boat, you either make one or swim. If you can't swim, then grab onto a log. If there are no logs, then swing from a vine. If you do not succeed, then try again. If you do not succeed a second time, then ask your neighbor how you will cross the river. If he does not know, then ask someone else. If the whole world doesn't know how to cross that river, then you will either have to give up or invent a new way. You invent because you need. You need because you desire.
Yeah, that's one of the extraordinary things about your book is there's so much of his own writing and words. Tremendously creative, thoughtful person, also a visual artist. Some of his drawings are in
Yes.
the book as well. And he was always showing that creativity and that imagination from an early stage, it sounds like.
Yeah, he was, and he's still an artist. He's doing very well, I should say, and he has a shop where he creates a lot of very unusual sculptures. And
Great. We'll link to it in the description. People can check it out and take a look at it. Yeah.
yeah,
So he goes into the system and looking back and you get more involved with his life and looking back on his journals and everything, he's still struggling the whole time to kind of figure out, is it something that the medications make sense? Is it not? Is it a chemical thing? Is there something else going on? He mentions trauma. And then, the system kind of does its what should we say? It's what it does and kind of pushes and presses and traumatizes and kind of forces him into the box. And it sounds like those were the most difficult times is when you all were sort of on board with that whole frame and there wasn't really anything else being offered.
that's right. I mean, and there was a period of time, he didn't really want to be at home anymore. And they didn't want to take him. They wouldn't take him back at the school he'd been in,
Mm.
which was really too bad because he'd, made friends and he liked to do sports. And
They wouldn't take him back because he was too disengaged or too otherworldly or
yeah, they said, he had this breakdown. We don't think it'll work out. He did go back to school, to a different school though, and called Beacon High School in Boston, which was a school for kids who have similar difficulties. And he was, seeing a therapist regularly for his medication too. And he did graduate from that school, from high school, and he got a girlfriend there. And but it was real ups and downs. And one point. Well, they put him early on clozapine, Clozaril,
hmm
what's called kind of a last resort
yeah,
medication.
antipsychotic. Yeah, they had tried all these and what he wasn't like he wasn't coming back into this so-called normal reality. That's why it was a last resort because the others hadn't worked.
Right. That's true. And so from the
Mm.
medical world's perspective, he needed to be on
Right.
this medication.
Because he needs to be in this reality. That's the whole point of the medical frame. Yeah.
Yeah, and he had so-called delusional thinking, and but at the same time, he's writing these amazing things in his journal. So he's contemplating all this. He's able to step outside
Yeah.
himself and go into those places. He said in one of his remarks in his journal, if you're deep as a person, it's sort of like living with your feet in mud for 4 hours each day. The other part of the day is spent cleaning the feet off.
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
I can relate to that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that you wrote was so amazingly poetic, kind of a sharp way. Your empty core was not the problem. Everyone suffers such human ailments. Your fruitless trail of actual events is what you'll need to repent.
Fruitless trail of actual events.
Yeah,
That's what you'll have to repent. Mm.
yeah.
Wow. Did he grow up religious? Were you religious at all or?
Not really, but he always had this spiritual side, that was very, and he was a collector. He used to collect fossils on the beach, but he always had trouble with focus, with finishing problems in school, and so from a young age we'd had teachers talk about that. I remember one one thing that I tried, which worked the first time I tried it. One night he was, and he was off in his room and he was being impossible and he was angry and he wouldn't come to dinner. And so I went up there and I just decided to go into his world. And I'm listening to the radio and I said, "Oh, I'm talking to the radio. And I just went crazy on him. And then he felt sorry for me. He suddenly snapped out of it and he said, are you all right? Are you okay? And so it actually worked. Years later, when I tried that same thing, it didn't work. We'll get to that, but
But you say several times in the book that even though he was in these other realities and this is kind of mysterious sort of trouble happening, that he had always had this kind of uncanny capacity to kind of snap into lucidity, or at least this reality, and communicate just absolutely normal when for some reason it suited him or it suited the situation or there was something happening. Is that right?
yes, I would say it is. And you know, but had to stay on the medication. We didn't know anything else. Even once he went through electric shock treatments, which I have a
Mhm.
great regret that we ever did that. But I mean, you know, we didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And one thing I eventually did was for a while he was on Zyprexa, which put tremendous weight gain on people.
Yeah, I know a bit about Zyprexa. There was a scandal around Zyprexa. They weren't forthcoming about, like they often pharma Eli Lilly is. They weren't honest about side effects and marketing, and so there were some leaked files around that, and it became quite a scandal around that.
Yes, and I discovered that because they gave no warnings on them. There's no
Right.
warning label or anything, and they knew quite well what that medication did.
Hmm.
So I there was a class action suit that had been mounted against them, and I
Hmm.
got Franklin into it, and he
Great.
got a small settlement, you know, eventually, and because I was just so pissed off, you know, that how could this company, that's what I mean, I've learned a lot about pharmaceutical companies over the years, and but they don't care. So that was the biggest selling medication in the world, you know,
Yeah.
one of them.
Blockbuster. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a really important time where Franklin was really not doing well at all. And my brother, who's a younger brother who's in the real estate world and had a lot more money than I did, helped out with getting him in a place called Earth House in New Jersey, where it was a group living situation where they emphasized exercise. They had orthomolecular
Yeah.
nutrition, and he lost 100 pounds while he was there. He was there for over a year.
Did they reduce his meds? I think that's one of the things that they
They did, yeah. But he still stayed on them, but you know they reduced them to some degree, and I'd go visit him on a regular basis, and
100 pounds. Well, yeah.
yeah, because he'd ballooned up to like 300 pounds. It was just terrible.
For especially for a young person, just
Yeah,
getting in touch with their body and trying to understand how to manage food, nutrition, and exercise and all that kind of stuff. It's an absolute crime. It's interesting, the Earth House connection, because listeners to Madness Radio may know about the summer camp we do, Mad Camp, and it turns out that the caretaker of the retreat center that we do Mad Camp at every year is a wonderful guy, and he worked at Earth House.
oh
So
really?
there's a possibility, I mean, obviously confidentiality is a thing, but there's a possibility that he might have actually met Franklin at one point. I have to look into the dates on when all that happened, if it
Yeah,
lines up, but I think it's an interesting connection. So
it
so
is.
so
Yeah,
yeah, so you put him in a better environment and he does a lot better. And but it was
yes.
expensive because your brother is helping out because he's got this real estate thing. So that says a lot about the failings of the system if we're not providing those kinds of things for everybody.
Yeah, I know. And finally, you know, he couldn't do that anymore, and we had to. I mean, he didn't want to leave Earth House. I mean,
Oh gosh, yeah.
it was a wonderful place for him, and he had friends there, and
But
a
just
girl who,
financially
but
couldn't
just
agree. Wow.
couldn't continue to do it. And
Wow. Wow.
so he came back to, and he lived in a group home in the Boston area for a while when I was more on the East Coast than I was the West. And I was writing a biography at the time of James Hillman, depth psychologist,
Yeah.
post-Jungian thinker. You know who James was.
Very influential on my own my own journey for sure. But maybe you can tell the listeners what it is about Jung that James Hillman is part of, and maybe how Hillman is distinct. And then we'll get to the next part of the story, which is really remarkable how Hillman kind of influenced your own thinking about your son.
Yeah, he was never my therapist, and we met as friends. My wife and I and our extended family had been studying his work. He wrote a book called The Soul's Code in the
Mhm.
mid 1990s that was amazing, number one bestseller too, after Oprah had him on, which has the kind of wonderful theory that we choose our parents. Our soul chooses the parents before we come down to this plane, and that's in the sense of the acorn becoming the oak later. They're the ones that the gods or whatever feel that will help us fulfill whatever destiny we have on the earth. And so,
How to make lemonade out of lemons for
yeah,
some of us for sure.
right. So James was an amazing thinker. I mean, I think probably one of the great thinkers that the world's ever known, even though he's not that well known in America. He's an American, but he's not as well known as he is in Italy and Japan, actually. He created what's called archetypal psychology and wanted us to get away from monotheism and realize that we all have many gods within us that manifest at different times and different parts of our life. And so he was never my therapist, as I say, but he was hugely influential. He's 21 years older than I. He was a mentor in many ways. I ended up eventually, he passed in 2011, but I wrote a 3 volume biography of the man called about his life and ideas. And there was a moment, I think it was before Franklin went to Earth House or just before, but in that same era, when I went to see James one day and was interviewing him. And we were driving along to get some lunch, and he said, picked up on the fact that something was bothering me. He said, "Something's bothering you. Is it your son?" And I said, "Yeah, it is." So he started to talk to me. He said, he said, I want you should try something different. He said, just don't treat him like the doctors do, he's this person who's afflicted with these terrible problems.
Don't talk to him with like, how do I help you? How are you feeling today? Can we help you fix? How can I support you? This kind of like, he's the patient.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and he said, and just if he goes off on because he would often we'd be driving along and Franklin would say, "Oh, I built that building over there," or he'd make things up where especially if we were in public, I would kind of cringe. I wouldn't know what to say or what to explain this.
So-called delusions that maybe have greater depth if we start to listen more deeply. Yeah.
Exactly, and so that's what James Hillman was urging me to do, and
One of the things I think is remarkable about Hillman is he really encourages us to treat the imaginal realm, the realm of dreams and fantasy and ideas as real as this world. He's very open to shamanism and the idea of different realities, rather than the kind of way in which psychotherapy is often focused on, okay, how do we solve problems in this world? And what is your dream telling you about fixing things in your life? Well, actually, maybe you need to have a relationship with the images and the symbols and the gods and the powers that are in that other world as a way of cultivating your soul and cultivating something that includes this world, but is much bigger than this world.
yes, exactly. That's very nicely put. Yeah, here's a passage where I write about this in My Mysterious Son.
Hmm.
Um, Hillman had been a practicing therapist for 40 years and had broad experience with mental illness. He proceeded to speak of how, as years went by, the intensity of schizophrenia lessened, but the personality diminished at the same time. Basically, he meant that people afflicted with the disease, so called, often don't grow emotionally beyond their first breakdown. Hillman didn't necessarily buy into schizophrenia being strictly genetic. He spoke of how mysterious the disease is. The doctors don't really know what causes it or what medications will work best, coupled with the fact that it strikes most all of its victims in their late teens, which of course had happened with Frank, or early 20s. He seemed to be indicating that there's a soul choice involved by the individual so affected. And later, in terms of Frank's unwillingness to take certain medications, Hillman said it's important to, quote, respect resistance, that maybe he knows something we don't.
Hmm.
During his back and forth with his Shattuck Hospital doctor over whether Frank could hang on to his federal housing voucher, Hillman told me that his formerly being able to live independently had marked real progress. How it's always one step forward and half a step back. How old is Franklin Hillman asked when I saw him on another occasion. When I said he was 25, he reiterated that schizophrenia tends to calm down with age, but a contained environment is good. And then he said regression is critical for recovery, falling into nothingness, being useless and dirty. But he spoke of how I should just go with wherever he was going when we were out together.
Wherever Franklin was going when you were out together.
Yeah, wherever Franklin was going, just follow that thread and have a good time with it. It's like play with it in a sense, and don't let it make me uptight. And he said, tell him about your day. He said, nobody treats him like a normal person. Just talk to him in a way that you would with anybody. I went to this, I interviewed so and so today. I did this today. And so once I started doing that, it changed everything. It completely changed my relationship with Frank because he no longer felt judged and
Exactly.
that I was just, this kind of cop, watching and nervous about everything he did and said, which made him, of course, do that even more sometimes.
Or more paranoia, probably didn't help the paranoia.
I'm sure it didn't,
Yeah, yeah.
so I'd been making a big mistake that way. And I remember one time we were was in an Asian restaurant. What he's like to do Chinese food, and he started speaking to the waiter in this made up Chinese. And the waiter looked a little nonplussed and walked away. And then later came back by us, and Franklin says to him, "Oh," he said, "don't worry." He said, "You and I are speaking in Mandarin, but he, meaning me, only understands uh, some other dialect in Chinese." And we started to laugh. I mean, it was a wonderful moment, and that's what we started to do. We could just have a good time together, and that meant the world to both of us, actually.
Yeah, it's a real turning point. It's also really remarkable that you were able to make that kind of switch. Hillman played a real important role there. I see this a lot in families that to somehow get the focus off of how do I fix this person and
Yeah,
get the focus more on what is in the relationship that I can change. How am I as a parent, as a caregiver, as a sibling, as a partner, how am I doing something in a rut? How am I stuck in my way of being, like helping or controlling or fixing or trying to
yeah,
problem solve or putting the person in the needing help role? How can I shift that into being more playful and being more a different kind of role, or even being the one who's telling my son or whoever it is, like, this is what my day was like. Maybe you have some advice for me. And that it sounds like it also helps reduce the stress and the fear. It's a less fearful place of like, oh, what am I going to say the right thing to figure out how to help you get out of your, and more like, well, let's be together and be more enjoying our company and exploring this creative world that you're presenting. So that was a real shift in the family system dynamics in a sense there. And it sounds like Hillman played a really central role in just helping you kind of take that different path. I mean, the idea also of, we talk about the soul's code or choosing your parents, and it's not about the suffering that you go through is your fault because you chose it. It's more like there's something here that you can make use of and that you can actually use for your own growth and your own development. That maybe there are some clues of a direction you should go instead of seeing it as I'm failing to be this person that I'm supposed to be, that maybe there's a new direction. And so when was it that you started to make the connections with shamanism and eventually possibly the decision of maybe, wow, maybe we should take Franklin to Africa? When did that emerge?
yeah. Well, it emerged after I actually took Franklin to Africa twice. The first time we went with the pediatrician that he'd had when he was a kid, who had grown up in Tanzania,
Hmm.
and we spent time going to see the wildlife. And At the end of that trip, this was quite a huge breakthrough as well for me, and him too, I think. We were in Tanzania at the Ngorongoro crater, incredible place for animal migrations, but Franklin became more and more distant. And and that night he was really angry at me. He was lying on his bed, and just on his back and looking around, and suddenly he started telling me. He said, "I don't like you. I don't like anything about you." I didn't know what I'd done. Um,
Being honest, that's nice, honest and direct. Okay.
yeah, and he went on to launch into this incredible, I don't know, I call it a riff. I mean, but he was like going way, way back in time, 16,000 years in time, to when Africa was first, yeah, as if he'd been there
Wow.
back then.
Wow.
And
Wow.
there's just a couple of things that and
Please.
I was really, really scared,
Hmm.
because I thought I never probably should never have brought him on this trip because he's just so far out there now that I don't know if he can come back. So I wrote a whole chapter about this in the book. In fact, I said this will sound cold, and it was cold, but I was sitting in a chair across the room, and of course, my habit is to write things down, take notes, and I just sat there. It was so extraordinary to me what he was saying that I just started writing down everything I could.
Hmm.
Um, Not thinking of writing a book about it, someday, but
Which I have to say is one of the most incredible things about your book is how detailed your documentation of your relationship is. There's so much quotes and so many rich descriptions of the interactions. I mean, obviously, it's from your perspective, it's from the father's perspective, but it's a tremendously rich book in that regard because you're a writer.
yeah, well, thanks. And I really was making notes right from the very beginning because I was trying desperately to figure out what was wrong, and maybe thought maybe there were some clues in there, and in fact, that's true. There were.
Yeah, there were. Yeah.
He goes off on this riff talking about the snake god, and I can he's one time he says everybody's hypnotized by Dick Russell, Dick Rascal. I probably just gave you all the secrets of Earth. You don't respect me or know me. If you want me to be your son, why do you oppress yourself? Then he rattles off this list of invented words, and I'm going to myself, saying to myself, "Who is this that's speaking?" I was getting more and more scared. He says, "I try to be nice to you when you boss me around. If you want to push me around, like that fight we had when I was at Park School." And here he goes back into the past to a very traumatic event for both of us, where we actually did have a
Oh,
physical fight
wow. Wow.
and just about fall out a window. And I was angry at him for listening to rap music long before he had his breakdown.
You were angry at him for listening to rap music.
Yeah, I
Oh.
was not very tolerant as a father. There was
Okay.
something about
Yeah.
during that period. Um, but anyway, he at this point, I'm getting more and more concerned. And he says that this Africa said I came here 16,000 years ago. It's subliminal and people don't believe it, but it's true. I'm just here suffering right now. I've been dunked, lowered, guineaed into a position here in Africa. So it's like he's picking up on, my God,
He's channeling, he's definitely connecting with history and the ancestors
the slave world, all of that, right?
completely, completely. And he's black and you're white and you're this
Yes,
Dick Russell and you're the rascal and you're saying stop listening to rap music. And so we start to see that this person's psyche is completely very in touch with reality, but maybe a deeper reality than us ordinary hypnotized normal parents or whoever might usually be in touch with.
right, right, exactly. Yeah. And he talks about this clock. He says, I came before Adam. The original king was Alpha. Maybe you could fly me to the Matrix and we'll hang out there a while. I don't want that star destroyed. I'm there right now eating the three wishes thing. I'm sorry the earth came to love money so much. So I'm sitting there writing all this down, and
Wow.
all of a sudden I hear this cry outside the window, like no cry I've ever heard. It was like, ah, and it was a bird, but it was like another worldly bird. And
Wow.
it was right outside the window. And I saw this image of a banshee. I mean, I went up to get something to eat. I asked him if he wanted to come. He didn't. And then suddenly he says, "Well, would you just turn the lights off when you go, please?" So he's just back in a sense.
Yeah.
I go up and I think about the fellow who was our guide on this trip to see the animals, Stefan. He and Franklin got along so well because he never questioned anything Franklin said.
This is an African, a black man that we're talking about.
Yes, and he's a Maasai
Ah,
and a wonderful guy.
an indigenous African.
Yes, and I thought maybe I should bring him down to the to our cabin, and maybe he could help. But then I think, nope, whatever I got to do, I got to do it myself. So I went back and sat down again, and Franklin went into sort of headed for his riff again and going out there, and I suddenly I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, I walked over to the bed, and I said, Frank, I can't handle this. It's too much for me. You've got to help me. This is driving me crazy. I don't understand the language. And suddenly he stopped and he looked at me and he said, you're crying. And I wasn't even aware that I was. And I don't know the last time he saw me cry.
Mm,
And he said, are you having a breakdown? Suddenly he's the one
yes.
filled with compassion, in charge.
Yeah.
I said,
You switched roles there.
we completely switched roles. I
Yeah.
said, maybe I am. I don't know.
Yeah.
And he looks at me and he says, well, maybe you're the one who should be hospitalized. I mean, I'll never forget it, right?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, there we go.
And
Wow.
so, I'm no longer the father. He's no longer the son. I mean, it's like we've completely switched roles here. I wrote this in the book. What's happened in the room is that I've been forced to let it all be, to let Franklin be Franklin. And he goes a long way toward becoming the plumed serpent that he's talked about in that moment. All of us want spiritual things to be pure, serene. Our heroes and our saints, our holy men and women, our mad monks and priestesses, above it all. They're not. They're all half crazy Joan of Arcs. But they have a job to do, a job that may last only for a time or a lifetime, which may destroy them or lift them up, is as likely to crucify and crush them as to redeem and save them. What we owe them, yes, our own sons and daughters, is to honor them in their calling, serve them, love them, and admit that we are made of different stuff.
Beautiful. Yeah, there's so much of a failure to recognize that sometimes people are just very, very different. And they may have way more wisdom and way more intelligence and way more knowledge and connection than we can comprehend. And they need to just be welcomed and accepted in their state rather than how do we get them to a 9 to 5 job and how do we force them into the mold of being like their
Yeah.
father or being like their parents or whatever. And so at some point you decide that you are thinking in terms of shamanism and you get into
Yes.
with the shamanic tradition because that's in some cultures it seems like that's crucial when someone has these qualities or powers or at some point because it sounds like what you're picking up over and over again is that Franklin has these incredible psychic, telepathic, ancestral channeling gifts that he's just
Yeah.
spontaneously kind of like they're like sparks coming off of him. Were there times?
In fact, talked about James Hillman a little bit, and he used to he'd talk about James Hillman, I mean, but without even knowing anything about him. And he one day he's sitting in the car and he says, "Oh yeah, I mentioned James Hillman," and he says, "Oh yeah, he wrote the Human Genome." I said, "No, well, actually, it was called the Soul's Code." He says, "Well, that's what I mean. I mean, it's the human genome, right?" And then right when James Hillman died, he was suddenly seeing dead people in the carpet and where he lived. I mean, he was so in tune with my inner reality or my external reality, even in what I was writing about in those ways. And then I guess it was in 2012, and interestingly, I had met Robert Whitaker. I'd read a couple of his
Wow,
books
great.
and was very, of course, appalled at what the psychiatric medications had done to people. So I went to a conference in Maine where alternatives were being presented. You might even have been there. I don't know. I think it was
Mm.
2012. And I just read a book called The Horse Boy, which I forget the author's name even
Oh
at the moment, but
yeah,
it was
yeah.
a wonderful book
Hmm.
about
Hmm.
taking their autistic son, the author, it's a true story, to Mongolia, where they ride horses, and it totally changes. It opens something up in the son that's never happened before. So I just read that book,
Yeah, riding horses is not a verbal activity. It's not
Yeah,
like it's a kind of thing that if you ride horses well, being autistic or not is kind of not even relevant. At least that's what I kind of get from that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I there was a woman there who spoke about having a shaman and how it had really helped her with her condition. So I'd never really thought much about it. But I went to see someone with my wife Alice, and then on the we left and realized that he needed to see someone maybe from an indigenous tradition. And she remembered that when I was writing, again, this is thanks to James Hillman, working on the biography, he had died by then. That there was a man that he had gotten to know at the men's groups that he was very influential in. His name was Malidoma Somé, and he was a shaman from West Africa who'd come to the U.S. Had quite a story himself. Wrote a great autobiography called Of Water and the Spirit,
Yeah.
where he describes having been taken from his village in Burkina Faso when he was small and being raised by the Jesuits in a whole other area, and then escaping, running away when he was 21, making his way back to his village and going through. He didn't speak the language even, and they didn't want him back, and he went through the initiation that you usually do when you're 13, when he was 21, and then went on to. He was told his grandfather had been a shaman, and it was said that his Malidoma's mission was basically who makes friends becomes friends with the stranger. He ended
Hmm.
up getting educated at the Sorbonne and at Boston University, and telling this story to this men's group, and becoming a very well-known person in the United States as carrying this shamanic tradition from West Africa. So he was, it turned out, out in, I was then living in Ojai, near, not too far from LA. And I wasn't living there, but he was there doing Malidoma was in Ojai doing a workshop. So I made arrangements to go see him. And this began an incredible relationship that lasted for many years. And Malidoma said to me the first day, because you do a divination, and there's a cloth in front of you, and you move these objects. If you're male, you move them in a clockwise direction with your strong hand. And there's bones, there's coins, there's all kinds of little objects that move around, glass.
This is the shamanic ceremony that Somé and his tradition does as part of their practice.
Yeah, and he would do this for lots of people, and he would read the pattern. So in this pattern, what he saw about Franklin was that he was a remarkable person, very in touch with other worlds. He said, but your ancestors don't know who he is, and they need to give him a place at the table. So I was assigned a series of rituals to go to the beach in Malibu and bring, various things, rum and pieces of corn, and perform this water ritual, putting these things into the waves. And also, I had to start communicating with my ancestors, get their pictures out, do all these different things.
So the focus has sort of been on Franklin, but now the shaman, Malidoma Somé, is saying, hey, Dad, you need to work your ancestral lineage.
That's right. And it really became quite an amazing experience for me. I've never really thought much about my ancestors. I kind of separated
Mm.
from my parents when I was in my 20s and went off on my own, and that was it. I mean, I saw them and all of that, but I didn't really ever think much about it. And well, first of all, I took Franklin to Jamaica when Malidoma was there, and they met and had an amazing time together. Malidoma said it was like meeting a colleague because in the indigenous traditions, often so-called schizophrenics would be called shamans because, they are very similar in experience and ability to communicate with beings. And
Or they may be in the midst of their initiation process and they're going through the so-called crazy phase, but they'll come out of it once they're reborn into this reality.
exactly, so you got it. So one time we were having a really hard time in the divination itself. And Malidoma read the pattern and he looked at me and he said that there's something I had to do. He said, you need to go to the Middle Passage
Hmm.
where Franklin's mother's ancestors
Hmm.
crossed
Hmm.
in the last century. You have to perform a ritual there. You've got to somehow bridge the gap between the
Hmm.
ancestors on her side and the ancestors on yours. So you need to obtain a slave shackle, and you've got to go there and return that shackle to the sea. I looked at him like, are you kidding me? How am I going to do that? Well, I found a slave shackle actually on eBay, if you can believe that, and uh, and I bought it. So I bought it, but when it showed up in the mail, I found that I couldn't open it. And I left it sitting there on my desk for a long time. And eventually I decided that where I'm going to,
Yeah, you had such a powerful, you felt so strongly emotionally, just you weren't able to open the
I
package.
couldn't even open it.
Wow. Wow.
So I ended up going to Baltimore, where Etta was living, and took Franklin with me. He was in Boston at the time. And then I went off by myself. I was going to Cambridge, Maryland, where that's very close to the Middle Passage.
Edda's his mom. Edda's Franklin's mom.
Yes, Franklin's mom.
Mhm.
And she by now had seen Malidoma herself for divination. We were very much in Malidoma's world. So I went, I had written a book called Black Genius and the American Experience. I've always been drawn to
Mhm.
Africa. I wrote that book really as a response to the terrible book, The Bell Curve, which tried to say that,
Yeah.
black people are not as smart as whites. And it was just horrible. So I just I wrote about great people. And I decided I would go to Frederick Douglass's birthplace, and then also to where Harriet Tubman was from, two people that I'd written about in Black Genius. I had the shackle with me, and it was in my rental car. And I remember not being not welcomed at Douglas's birthplace by the people who had now taken over this homestead. But I went to the river where Douglas used to fish as a boy, and I took the shackle out of its package and went through a whole thing. I went to the Harriet Tubman Museum in Cambridge, Maryland, and while I was there, they showed a film, and then afterwards I went. There was a plaque on a wall. There was one plaque, and I went over to the plaque, and it was a reward from the 1850s for a family of escaped slaves. They were called mulatto slaves, and it was signed by William Russell. Now, I have no indication that that was an actual ancestor of mine, but people strangely had often called me Bill when I was growing up, and it really did me a turn. I mean,
That's a huge synchronicity for sure.
I was like, oh my God, right?
Yeah.
So then I went to the water and discovered that there was a sailing ship going out the next day, a replica of an 1812 sailing ship. And I thought, okay, they're going out into the Middle Passage. I booked a passage on that ship. And that night, and the next morning, I was, I went through a whole inner turmoil, trauma about this whole situation. I didn't know what was going on, but I was holding the shackle in my hands. I was crying.
You're not a person who cries very often, and now this ceremony
No,
has brought it forward.
yeah. And I called Alice, and as I hung up the phone, told her what was happening. My
Um,
watch stopped and would not start again. And as I left that hotel room, the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates was on the TV talking about an article he'd written about giving reparations for slavery.
hmm.
So I was in this
Yeah.
world.
You were in a different reality, a more real reality in an archetypal reality in a sense.
Yes, yes, exactly. And so I went out on the ship. First, I did a ritual pouring some milk into the water. I remember at the dock, and then I went out on the ship, and I didn't know there was 30 people on it, and I thought, how am I going to possibly? I had this shackle in my little black bag over my shoulder. How am I going to do this without people seeing me.
Following the instructions that Malidoma had given you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And but I found a moment, and suddenly I was alone, toward the bow of the boat, and I brought the shackle out of my bag and I threw it into the water, and I said, "Take it, water spirit." And something happened. I could feel a shift inside me when I did that. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know where it was leading me,
Hmm.
but it was an amazing moment. Eventually, and I'm not going to tell this whole story, but I do tell it in a new book I'm writing. I had to confront a slaveholder ancestor, and that was sort of the culmination of this particular situation.
The shift inside of you, was it a feeling of completion or a feeling of just emotional release? Or what, when you say shift, what was the feeling?
It was not quite completion, but it was a feeling of release.
Hmm.
Like I had opened a door and also closed a door, and I didn't know where it was going to happen to me. I remember coming back to the U.S. To the U.S. coming back to
Right.
Boston,
Right.
and suddenly there were I'd pass a young African American kid on the street, and they would turn my head, and I eventually became the mentor to one of these kids. That's a whole long story that I'm doing a book about now.
You talk a bit about that in My Mysterious Son too. It's that this whole path might have led you into mentorship.
It did. It absolutely did. It also led me, along with Franklin's mother and himself, it led us to make a trip to Burkina Faso in West Africa with Malidoma in 2016 for a healing ritual. And that made a huge difference in our lives.
How did that affect Franklin? What was his experience with that?
It affected Franklin profoundly. There were a lot of people with us. I mean, there were like 20, 25 people. Everybody had come for their own, reasons, whatever the situation they were dealing with, because Malidoma had found a holy man there in a very tiny village near a place called Bobo, the second largest city in Burkina Faso, which is right near Ghana and Nigeria, that whole part of West Africa. We were going to meet with the holy man who was he was had a Muslim temple, and he was also so he used both animism and his Muslim training. He was a beautiful man. He wore these long robes, and he sort of sat in a separate room from however many people were going to take part in it was a ritual in a sense, but what it really was he was going to give us individually prescribed medicine. And not this had nothing to do with psychedelics or anything. It was well, what we did, this is going to sound crazy, but we each
It's Madness Radio. It's not going to sound
we
crazy.
we, we blew into we had a Bic pen. They gave us a Bic pen, and the holy man was in the next room, and so we blew into it with our intention, and then the pen was taken to him, and he divined what he was going to give us in terms of these big clay medicine pots, which were full of herbs and cola nuts and different, you know, prescribed concoctions from that culture. And then we were to take these pots with us and both bathe with them and separately drink from them at different times. And it was quite a thing to go through that together. That was the beginning of the ritual. And there was another young man there who had similar problems to Franklin's. And so they had each other to talk to. I remember Franklin going up to the other young man and saying, "Are you a good machinist?" Franklin, interestingly, always loved welding and machines. Um, and then I remember Frank saying, "This I think we're starting on a marathon here." He got a haircut. I remember when he first saw the holy man. I said, "What do you think? What do you think of him, Frank?" Frank says, "He's a ghost-based ninja."
That's a great definition of a shaman, a ghost-based ninja.
That's,
Yeah.
I think so too. Um, he got his hair cut, which he often did when he was going through a change in his life. He'd cut his hair or change his hair in some way. It was very symbolic to him. He was at the time on Abilify and Clozaril,
Two antipsychotics at the same
two
time. A lot of
antipsychotics.
meds. Yeah.
So in consultation, on our own though, we decided, including Frank, quite willingly and ready, to start weaning himself off or down on the medication as we went through this new ritual. Melodoma took us to see a stick diviner who Franklin sat there drawing geometric patterns and hieroglyphs, which he often has in his art. So that goes all the way back, of course, to ancient Egypt. They talked about the forces of adversity, that there was an entity that had Franklin contained something that was very special, and there was an attempt to adversely affect it when he was 17 and had this breakdown.
Wow. Did that ever tie back to any biographical info that you know from 17? Or this was something that maybe happened that only Franklin was witness to, or maybe something was happening on an imaginal archetypal spirit level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, I think so because he never spoke about it, but he was often talking to someone, and he spoke once about a genie a genie from Jupiter that showed up and that gave him three wishes. And he said something very strange. He said the genie was cursed. So I've just thought of this moment that maybe that's has to do with what we were being told
Uh-huh.
in,
Uh-huh.
in West Africa. A lot of stuff happened over there. There was a lot of adversity that was experienced by Malidoma. We had people showing up at our various offerings. One time, he ordered a new vehicle and it showed up upside down. We got very close to being in an accident one night coming back from.
It showed up upside down, the vehicle. How did it?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I
Uh-huh.
don't know how in the shipping container.
Oh, oh. So these weird kind of coincidence, synchronicity, kind of uncanny atmosphere is happening all around this. And you were in an accident. You were in a car accident or something.
Almost, yes. Well,
Uh-huh.
we had a minor accident on the
Uh,
way back from a night when we were taken to be with these goats. And eventually, I think one of them was to be sacrificed for us. So there were animal rituals involved, and there was very when you're in that world and you're looking for something that's so different, unique, and potentially life changing, you just go in that world and live. At least we did, and so did the people who had chosen to go on this voyage. We went through a chicken offering of chickens of for each of us, where it was very important that in the sacrifice of the animal that the chicken end up on its back. If it didn't, this was a bad omen. I later studied things about chickens and about cows and bulls. I mean, and these go back centuries in terms of the importance of these animals in ritualistic settings. One time there was this old woman showed up at the gate of Melidoma's compound, who was really a witch. I mean, and um, Etta shook her hand and couldn't get the uh, the chills off her hand after she shook it. I mean,
wow.
we were really in a very sometimes scary world. And Frank, through the process of all this, was tapering off on his meds. And in the end, we were there for several weeks, traveling from Malidoma's village back to this small village where the holy man was, seeing the stick diviner. We even went to a funeral. It was a funeral for a local person, but I had all these images came to me of my ancestors going back in through the centuries. One of the people who was with us, I remember on this trip, went to a mountain where the Contomble, the little people, live. And Malidoma had said to me in the very beginning, he said, if we can get you to the Contomble, get Franklin there, I think he'll be able to speak their language.
Who are they? These are some sort of spirit
They're
helpers. Yeah.
spirit that yes, they're spirits who live in Burkina Faso and are guardians. They're guardian spirits. Anyway, I mean, this may have sounded all very strange to people. I don't know, but
Like I said, it's Madness Radio. This is what it's all about.
okay.
So
One of the women who was with us on this trip, after going to this mountain where the Contemple were, had this download as she went to sleep of a parade of Africans in their native dress who had died during the slave era.
this is like a vision that she saw, like a downloading. Like
She actually saw them going past her
she
bed.
saw it. Wow.
And then we went through, at the end of this, we had to choose a bull that would be sacrificed for us. This was done by the holy man himself. I remember Franklin saying, the medical unity is at hand. Then we had to go through a ritual with the heart of the bull. And I will never forget sitting in the mosque. The holy man was giving us a sermon there, which I couldn't understand, except I was told that he was talking quite a bit about Franklin to the people who were in the audience.
Wow.
And suddenly I felt this feeling in my heart like I've never felt before or since. It was like a flame bursting out of my solar plexus, rising up and just staying there. It seemed like a long time. It was probably just seconds, but it was a fire. And it was literally, I felt like I was on fire internally at my heart. Then we went in, we ate the heart of the bull that had been sacrificed for us in an adjacent room. The holy man spent a lot of time with Franklin toward the end, and then had him bring some of his clothing, a t-shirt and flip-flops, and leave it with him. We received protection to take home with us. When we were saying goodbye on the last day to the holy man, I remember going up to him. He started speaking to me in his native tongue, which was Jula, and I could understand everything he said. He wasn't saying a lot. I remember he definitely said, as I had chills, it's in the hands of God. And I wept as we left. And we went back to the nearby town of Bobo. And suddenly Franklin got very paranoid about that he was going off his medication. And that he was going to be hospitalized again. And what's going to happen? Because he'd been through this before. He'd been traumatized in hospitals and he hadn't been off medication like this. And
And the trip is going to end. He's going to go back to the US and yeah.
yeah, it's over. It's getting and so he did that night. He suddenly told us the next day. I'm glad he told us, but he'd suddenly gone back up on the clozaril, way up from like 100, 200, 150 to 300 milligrams again, or something like
Just
that.
on his own, he started taking a higher
Just on
dose.
his own, he just jacked it up, which was alarming in itself because how he's going to react to that. But then he said he would like me to call his doctor back in Massachusetts. And so I did. And I told him what we were going through. He knew we were going to make the trip. And he said, well, I would have probably done it more slowly, but you can't argue with success. So he was fine with Franklin having done this. Well, he was fine with him going off them as much as he had the meds, which said a lot for the doctor. I mean, he respected what we were doing or trying to do. So, and then when we went back to the US over the course of the next year, we'd gotten it fairly low, the amount of medication he was on, but his doctor took him off all of it. And he was doing okay until he got to the very end where it was all out of his system. And then he had a temporary crash.
So he crashed. So he went into a crisis. He went back into the hospital, or what happened at that
But he
point?
did for a little while. Then he ended up moving in with his mom in Baltimore after the hospital that he was in. And that's proven to be wonderful. I mean, they're still living together to this day. She had lost her husband. He had died of an illness, of cancer, I think. And then, Frank was there to be with her and take care of her. And
So they became closer, and that was part of the kind of outcome of this incredible journey and this meeting with the healers and Malidoma Somé connecting you with all this tradition and
Yes.
ancestry and so there was a big shift in Franklin's living situation. How was he kind of responding to all of this incredible experience that he went through? Was there a positive impact,
Yes.
do you think?
Oh, yeah. And I think I've thought of it a lot in the time since. I think a lot of it, or at least what made it so positive, was that we were doing this together as a family. Um, Etta had been, living on her own when she got married again, and we would see each other occasionally. But here we were, the three of us, who had been there, since that night in 1979 when he was born, and he he I think it meant a lot to all of us. We were sharing this experience. We were living out of these medicine pots, and uh,
Mm.
and going through these rituals with goats and bulls, and you know,
So it really brought the family together in a
it
sense.
did. It
Yeah.
really, really did. And
Mm.
it was a bond that has never gone away. I mean, Frank calls me almost every day. We talk, and I see him
Mhm.
regularly, and his art has continued to be wonderful. And I'll read you one other thing that
Yeah.
I end the book with, actually. It's from his journal in the early 2000s, and it's one of my favorite of his pieces.
This is Franklin's writing.
Yeah. There was a man that lived in a box. The box was his heart. So he would explain to the world that his heart was square and empty. The world would say they already knew. He would ask why, and they would say that theirs was too, and that he was stupid to ask such a question. Now, when the man realized that his heart was an empty box, he cried and was aware of his emptiness. So he had a plan. He would fill the box with beautiful presents and give it to someone. The presents were shiny and brilliant. Some were soft and mushy. So he asked the world who he could give the full box to, and no one could tell him. He waited years. Every day he said goodbye to yesterday. The others with the empty box hearts were jealous and bewildered. Then one day he met a wise man. The wise man asked why he filled his heart with things. He told the wise man that his heart had been empty. The wise man replied that those were things of the world and that they would disappear in time. Then the man realized this and cried again. He asked the world what he would do. They did not answer, for they did not know. So he decided to burn the box that was his heart, and he began to live alone, his heart on fire.
Incredible. It's like an ancient folk tale. So powerful.
Yeah, it is.
Incredible. So bring us up to date. How is Franklin doing now? You say he's a artist, he's creative and active, and how is he doing after this incredible experience that you all had together?
Yeah, well, now we're actually almost 10 years past it. I mean, not quite. It will be next year. And I couldn't be happier with how he's doing. I mean, I think that he's in the best shape he's been in, since before he had his breakdown, and yeah, so called. And he calls me all the time. He's much more social. He goes out with his mom and her friends, and has made some friends on his own. And he has a shop where he does sculptures, and he does a lot of paintings. And he still, I remember when I'm there, I sometimes hear him upstairs in his room. He's talking to somebody. It's not somebody he's making up. I mean, there is this being. We made a trip, actually, this past spring. He had met, without getting into the whole story, I had been mentoring, as you mentioned, a young man named Romeo, who is a genius in mythology. I met him when he was 17. Yeah, he'd grown up. His father was in jail. His mother was on drugs in Las Vegas. He had grown up robbing people on the streets in order to survive. That's what he was doing when I met him. But he'd had mythology in his life. He discovered it when he was a teenager, about it when he was 11. He studied he was in juvenile hall in detention, and they made him study the dictionary, and then he started to read more and more, and he discovered he loved the myths, and he had a photographic memory. So he memorized the myths of every culture. And I needed to know more mythology because I was writing this book on James
On
Hillman,
James
for
Hillman,
whom
yeah, of course.
mythology was a big deal.
Yeah, yeah.
So, long story, but I became his mentor in when not long after I met him, and we are now finishing a book together called Bridges, a South Central Odyssey, which is going to come out in June, and we're doing a podcast series around it. Um, he's amazingly well spoken, as people will find, and the book is a chronicle of our relationship. And in the course of it, and we use alternate voices all through the book about the same situation. How does this old white guy from the Hollywood Hills and this young black kid see the same thing that they're walking through? And in the course of that, he met Franklin. We went to Baltimore, and he stayed with them along with me for a few days, and then I took Franklin and Romeo to Greece and Egypt last spring, and they got along just fine. And we spent at the culmination of that trip, we were at the Sphinx and the pyramids, which where years ago when I was traveling when I was young, in my 20s, I'd had a very mysterious experience where I'd slept at the feet of the Sphinx one night, climbed to the top of the Great Pyramid in the morning, felt this energy come into me. Nobody saw me do it. I mean, saw me make that climb, but I felt something come into me that was somehow mapping out some parts of my future.
Hmm.
And I do write about that in the new book. Um, but I wanted to go back and I wanted to experience the Sphinx and the pyramids again with my son and my sort of adopted son, Romeo.
Because you sort of met Romeo as a result of all the following through with Franklin's process as a shaman and a visionary.
I absolutely did. I mean, I was drawn to this, it's called Echo, this meeting of the Youth Mentoring Connection where they bring these inner city kids together to let down their hair about their lives. And then I met this kid. And so I see it all as a thread, part of a long thread that I've been following. And
The soul's code, perhaps.
yeah, perhaps, I
Yeah.
think definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
So I took the two of them there and well, we went to the pyramids. And years ago, I'd gone into the king's chamber, which now there was a whole other entrance to it, um, which was not easy to navigate. And I mean, Romeo went with me. Franklin wisely decided not to go in. He's bigger than us, and but he almost on all fours, going to get to the king's chamber inside. You go through this entrance, and it's a long crawl. I mean, it's pretty heavy duty. But Romeo came along, and then um, and later I was looking at the Sphinx, and I felt that same energy. It was still happening, and we rode camels. I remember, and when we finished the camel ride, Franklin jumped off, threw his hands up in the air, and said, "The UFOs are here." Well, I didn't see him, but he was uh, he was communicating, and now I'm writing a book about UFOs. So like I say, I couldn't be happier with how he's doing. I'm very close to his mom, who's an incredible person, um, and they have each other in Baltimore, and I'll be going back to see him again, I think, pretty soon.
Dick, this has been just incredible. I really am so grateful to have you on the show. What a feast of possibilities and threads and visions for you and your son and also for a whole different way of thinking about what we call mental illness. And wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody who goes into these remote seeming delusional places were met with some kind of exploratory process of connecting with, if that's right for them, if that's what they respond to,
Yeah,
connecting with the ancestors, finding what might be the mystical, artistic side. So, and Dick, where is Malidoma Somé in your life today?
sadly, Malidoma died a couple of years ago. Oh, he was only 65. I was going to write a book with him where we were talking about it. based on a series of ritual workshops that he was doing, one of which was called ancestralization. It was at that workshop that I actually met the ancestor that it was, I believe, a slaveholder, and went through a whole internal thing, sort of culminating that exploration for
You
me.
met through a visionary state.
Yes, yes, during a ritual there, and again, tremendously powerful experience. Where it's kind of a matter of sometimes, so I understand, uh, you not only need to confront an ancestor, but they need forgiveness from you. You know, it's a reciprocal thing in order to,
There's unfinished business to attend to.
there's unfinished business, yeah, which had really been the story with Malidoma since the beginning. And but he died of a heart condition, and he's deeply missed. We'll certainly say, um, and you know, uh, yeah, I guess that, yeah, I just deeply uh, wish that he was still with us and we could have continued to work together in whatever way that would have manifested.
So let us know again the name of your book and also the upcoming book and how people can get in touch with you and the podcast and if they want to follow up.
Yeah, well, I have a Substack I've started to write. So I write about everything from the environmental destruction that I think is happening right now, to Robert Kennedy Jr. and what he can do for the healthcare, public health crisis in our country, to the subject of some fascinating new revelations about UFOs that are happening.
The UFOs are here, it seems like there's a lot
You
happening.
know,
Yeah, they are.
yeah, and there's this fascinating thing going on. I'll just mention it here. Is
Mhm.
there a lot of some of these special forces guys, these really amazing military, soldiers and worked in intelligence and everything. One of them is named Jake Barber, and he recently came forward as a whistleblower because he had actually, using a helicopter as a pilot, picked up a craft that he says was of NHI, non-human intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's ever come out and said that before, who's been involved directly in such a thing. Then he told a story recently when he was on this show, on the Ross Coulthard show. There was another craft that was on the ground, and suddenly from it, he was overwhelmed with emotion. He's even telling the story. Some years after it happened, he began to cry. He said it was a very feminine energy that's how he described it, emanating from this. And he spoke about this, something called psionics, where people with psychic abilities are being trained to actually summon these otherworldly craft. And it's going on right now. So I don't know. I mean, it's so frankly to say the UFOs are here. I mean,
Yeah.
something's going on.
If we talk to indigenous cultures, I'm sure this is true of Malidoma Some's heritage as well. They recognize that humans aren't the only intelligent beings that and what we call spirit beings or angels or the other realities. It starts to blend with the idea of non-human intelligence and non-human existence. And
Yeah, I think we're on the edge of some big revelations about it. So I've been writing about that in my Substack as well, which is just substack.com/Dick Russell, two S's, two L's. And then I have the UFO book will come out next year. The book with Romeo Bridges, A South Central Odyssey, will come out in June, and it's going to be introduced really with a podcast series that we're starting to tape right now. So I have a website, dickrussell.org, which I don't use that often, but I'm putting it more in the Substack. But yeah, I'd love to hear what people think about what I've been talking about today, and it's been great being with you and getting a chance to delve into some of this with somebody who it feels to me like you've got a real understanding from personal experience and have been. I'm not trying to prescribe shamanism to
no, that's
people.
not what it's about. It's about opening a door that people should know is open if that's what they want to explore, along with other doors.
There's a lot of doors
What
that
works for
people,
you? That's something we say a lot on Madness Radio. Find out what works for you.
yeah, I think so too. And just to realize that there's something beyond the despair that we often feel as parents, and certainly the child is going through that similar kind of thing, that all there is medication. And I'm not saying everybody should go off medication. I'm not promoting that either. But but I think that there are alternatives, and they've shown in other countries that people who have these such problems, if they come together communally and share what they've gone through, sometimes even live together. There have been places that's happened, like Diabasis, I think it was called years ago, that
Soteria House, and yeah.
Soteria House.
Hmm.
That makes a huge difference, and certainly it did when Franklin was at Earth House. He was surrounded by young people like him, who had similar things that they needed to share. So I hope that that's the takeaway that people would get from our conversation, that there are other possibilities, things that can open doors that you might never have expected were there. I mean, as I said, he's taught me, and broken through a lot of my fixed ideas. And I'm very grateful for that, and grateful to have him in my life as well as his mom. And here we are.
Wonderful. Dick Russell, thank you so much for joining us today on Madness Radio.
Thanks so much, Will. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
You've been listening to an interview with Dick Russell. He has written 17 books on subjects ranging from the JFK assassination to a biography of James Hillman and a biography of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the migration of gray whales. His book today we're discussing is My Mysterious Son, a life-changing passage between schizophrenia and shamanism. That's all the time we have on Madness Radio. Thanks for tuning in. What does it mean to be called crazy in a crazy world? Listen to Madness Radio, voices and visions from outside mental health.